Welcome again. We're just waiting for a few seconds as more people are joining. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the Q&A chat box, and we'll do our best to make sure that we go through all your questions within the time of the webinar. Thank you. Cool, I think we can start.
Excellent.
So welcome again, everyone. Welcome, Khaled.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate
No, thank you for it's a joint effort between Flat6Labs and Nuwa Capital to organize this webinar, and I'd like to thank your team as well for making it happen. So today we have, during the 7th webinar of Flat6Labs Start Smart series in partnership with Nuwa Capital, we have Khaled Al-Houni, the managing partner of Nuwa Capital. We'll be having more of like an informal chat. So we don't really have like a kind of like a moderator and a panelist kind of setup, but it will be more of like a general chat. Khaled might have some questions for me, I have some questions for Khaled. And also after that, we will be opening the floor for you guys to ask any questions during the second half of the webinar. So for the first 30 minutes, Khaled and I will be just having an informal chat about different topics that are pressing now. And then we will move to your questions. And again, you can ask questions on Zoom, on the Q&A chat box, or live on YouTube, and the team will be passing them to us. I think we can start with a quick round of introductions between myself and Khaled. Khaled, if you'd like to start by maybe telling people about yourself and Nuwa Capital, and then I'll make a quick introduction about Flat6Labs and myself as well, and we'll take it forward from there.
Right, thanks, Ramiz. So again, thank you for having me. Really excited to have this discussion. I think a lot of great things to talk about, and really encourage everyone to kind of throw questions or engage in a debate or a discussion. I think these are quite interesting as different viewpoints come to the fore. Just a bit about myself. So up until very recently, I was, up until a couple of months ago, I was managing partner at Nuwa Capital. And I left a few months ago to help set up, to really kind of found this new venture firm, Nuwa Capital. And the idea there is to really invest in the emerging disruption that we're seeing in our region. And really focus on giving back to founders. I think the core focus of the fund and the thesis is distilling a lot of the learnings we had at Nuwa, which is really to focus on how do you enable and support founders, given the fact that the reality is it is very, very hard to grow businesses in the region. And the way we do that here is through a much stronger emphasis on providing operational and strategic support through dedicated people and resources that are our operating partner and Nuwa network members that are either kind of entrepreneurs who have achieved things in the past, or they're successful entrepreneurs, or they're subject matter experts in their respective fields, whether that's product, tech, fundraising, legal, and growth hacking, marketing, etc. So we want to really bring instead of like using our resources, to have a bunch of corporate finance people, really we want to focus on people who are operating experts that we can deploy at our companies. And then, the other big part of our thesis is to really think about having a wide geographic footprint. We think that the core part of our thesis is that great businesses are regional and pan-regional actually. So they include Pakistan, Turkey, MENA, and increasingly a little bit East Africa. So think about companies that can have that sort of footprint as a core part of our thesis. We don't have like very specific verticals, but we have some kind of key themes that we focus on. They're kind of B2B marketplaces, fintech, food and food tech, food related areas, SaaS. Those tend to be kind of the emerging areas that we're especially interested in. And then more recently, really around, the future of work and thinking about the evolution of the labor market, given all that's happening in the world today. So that's us in a nutshell. We just started. We're just starting to invest now. So we announced at Step a couple of months ago. We have an anchor investor in the form of the Faisaliya Group that's enabled us to go out there and start building the firm. And we're now sort of closing with new investors and also doing investments at the same time. So it's a interesting moment. I think what I keep saying is that it's actually, we're either incredibly lucky or unlucky to start the fund at this time. Very lucky in the sense that this is the moment when real innovation happens. If you look historically as to when great companies emerge, they tend to be in these types of moments of dislocation. If you look at like funds that are formed during different times of crisis, those tend to be the ones that outperform. But at the same time, it's clearly like a difficult period for everyone. Fundraising is difficult. There's a lot of uncertainty in the market that's not helpful. So, the answer to that question of whether we've been very fortunate or unfortunate, I think we'll probably answer in 6 months' time. We'll come back and have this conversation with Ram in 6 months' time.
Yeah, hopefully things get better as well within 6 months' time, maybe sooner than this. So a quick overview about Flat6Labs and myself as well. So my name is Ramez Sarafi. I'm the CEO of Flat6Labs, the regional operations of Flat6Labs. We position ourselves as a seed investment company where we invest in seed startups in very early stage, usually from inception and ideation up to market access and product development. We launched Flat6Labs in 6 different markets in the region. We started in Egypt 2011, then we expanded in Saudi Arabia, then Abu Dhabi, followed by Lebanon, Tunisia, and most recently in Bahrain. And that also we're working on launching in a couple of new locations. Stay tuned about this. All in all, we have invested so far in more than 260 startups from Bahrain up to Tunis. At the very early stage, as I mentioned, we are sector agnostic when it comes to technology and innovation. So we don't have a specific focus other than we invest in technology-based products that have, or startups that have an actual IP that can scale in different markets. One of our biggest values that we present to the startups, besides the program and the support that they get when they join Flat6Labs programs and accelerators, that we support them throughout the journey, even after graduation from the program or the accelerator. And we also provide them with follow-on funding, as well as our regional network and connections, where we connect them with all the resources and all like the right partners that they need to know across the MENA region. So I think we can jump right into the questions. Again, if you have any questions for me and Khaled, you can ask them in the chat box on Zoom or on YouTube. We also have a few questions that we have in mind. This will be more of an informal chat if you just joined us, where we'll be having a general discussion about like the new normal, as we are calling it, as everybody's calling it, and what to expect, especially when it comes to startups in the MENA region and all the circumstances that they are living through now. Khaled, I think I'll start as I have the mic. I think you have a very, like what you highlighted as Nuwa Capital in terms of the structure and the entire thesis and how this is like in contrast with other VC models in the region around the world, I think is quite unique, and it's something new that you are presenting in terms of venture capital and how you actually manage funds. So maybe if you can expand a little bit on this, because maybe someone just joined us now. But also I'm interested to understand about like the structure itself. Are you doing things differently when it comes to fundraising, the kind of LPs you have in the fund, in terms of investments as well? So you mentioned that you have this kind of hands-on support rather than having a financial management team to work with a big number of startups. You have actually people who will be helping startups when it comes to all the different matters that they need, from legal to product to market and so on. So maybe if you can shed more light about the structure that you are envisaging for Nuwa Capital and how it's different from every other VC that we have in the market.
So maybe I can start, like, I think talk about like the overall vision, and then how our structure is a bit different, and then how we hope really to evolve the model. I think, you know, the starting point is, I think we really believe that the kind of traditional 2 and 20 model, you know, the traditional GP LP fund, for those who are familiar with that, I think that's something that's going to change over time, whether that's in venture or in private equity or in different funds. And I think part of the reason for that is because there is this kind of information asymmetry that's allowed it to exist, where, you know, there's people with capital, so sources of capital, big institutions, development funds, etc. And then there are entrepreneurs who are deserving of that capital. The fund manager really sits in the middle and kind of collects fees by kind of picking who those winners that are the recipients of capital are. I think in the very long run, maybe not in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, but like in the long run, that model is going to be disrupted quickly. And so well, with that in mind, and with seeing everything that's happening in the region today, I think the big thing that we wanted to solve for as we set out to create this new firm was think about how do we kind of change the narrative? How do we kind of build for the problems in the region and for the emerging markets more broadly? So the first thing we said, we want to create a network of support. So rather than taking the 2% management fee and like hiring a big like investment management team, we want to kind of focus on creating a network of people that we can work with that can drive value add support to the underlying companies that we invest in. I think secondly, we wanted to really create this overarching network of entrepreneurs. So I think one thing we vowed to do is anybody we invest in, we will give part of our carried interest back to the entrepreneurs that we invest in, because we want those entrepreneurs in future to become part of our network and to be part of the driving value back to their fellow entrepreneurs in future, once they have the ability to do so. We also wanted to think about how do we drive support across different markets. So I think a key thing for us was, before we set out to do anything, was have different corporate partners that are aligned with us in certain segments. So our first corporate partner that was our investor in the fund and our partner in the fund is the Faisaliya Group, obviously, and I think we hope to add others that can add value in very specific sectors. So Faisaliya is focused on certain key verticals like pharma, health tech, food service, etc. So I think there's some areas where they can be very supportive, as well as unlocking the opportunity in Saudi. I think we want to start to build out that approach where we have corporate LPs that we help solve for them, right? And they invest in the verticals that they're interested in. So kind of create this kind of investment support platform for venture for corporates that add value to the portfolio and add value to the LPs. So I think those are kind of the key tenets that we set out to do. We wanted to really put the entrepreneur at the center of everything we do. We wanted to solve for the entrepreneur and build networks around the entrepreneur that can help drive value and drive opportunities. In terms of the thesis, I think, we also wanted to invest in a slightly different way. So we do traditional minority venture investments, but we're also interested in basically, venture building or venture studio as well. We'll do that. If we find the right entrepreneur and the right gap in the market, we will also greenfield opportunities where we see there's an opening, particularly in segments that we're sort of interested in. And then we want to be very thesis driven. So I think we don't want to be, as much as possible, I guess, we don't want to be reactive in the sense that people come pitch and we say, that's good, that's not good. In an ideal world, we've sort of mapped out the landscape of the areas we want to invest in, build a theory as to what we think works, and then go find the entrepreneurs solving for that, and then align them with our network of value add support that can help drive it. I think that's what we're, what we're really passionate about and want to do.
Cool, excellent. I think I mean, talk about the new normal, as this is like the title of the session. And maybe I think this is a question that we both need to answer, is about like, how is the industry changing for all like the stakeholders, from the entrepreneurs to the VCs, the corporates, for example, and the market at large. Are there any early insights that you have been seeing that you feel like this is like the trend? I think many people have been talking about like nobody would be going to the office anymore, or like we'll be shifting to like virtual offices, or like this is like remote, like Zoom calls and like remote working is like the new normal now. And this would definitely like, I think people have been posing this question, if this would actually impact the compensation, for example, for tech teams where you don't necessarily need to be in the US or Europe or in Dubai or wherever you are, and might be more expensive for you to be there, but actually you can stay in wherever you are, and maybe it's an emerging market, or maybe it's a cheaper location to be based out of. And would this impact your compensation or not? So all of these are questions that people are asking. And I was wondering actually if you have any early insights that you have been gathering or actually have been thinking about.
So I think like very obviously and very clearly that, the impact of the kind of COVID crisis has really shed a very bright light on the fact that it is possible to operate reasonably efficiently and effectively on a distributed basis using the technology that we have today. And that technology is only going to get better. So it really kind of casts into question the immediate requirement to be co-located in the same place, in a kind of very kind of dense urban cluster around offices, etc. It sheds light on the fact that, we've, especially in other markets, but, very, very pertinent to Cairo, like people waste a lot of time commuting. It's a big part of their, their time a day that could be, is a net productivity loss. So I think all of those are clear. And I think there is a shift towards more distributed teams, distributed working, evaporating a little bit, like, international boundaries a little bit more, right? As you mentioned, you can have a lot more distributed teams internationally. So I think that's all there. And I think we'll see a big move towards that as we go forward. I think you're already starting to see big urban shifts in the US happen very quickly, and not helped by like what's going on right now around like, riots, etc. That's not helpful. However, I think one thing that's, that's contrary to this is historically, there is a large amount of innovation that happens around just throwing a large number of people together in a dense environment. And, I think it's a big part of like economic engines. And it's the mechanism by which those engines work are like not really understood by economists, right? But I think that cannot be easily replaced. There's something very intangible about having a large number of people interconnected in a dense environment, especially around creativity and innovation. Even though in theory we could all have like a Zoom call, etc. But I think there's something very, very important about the intangible effect of co-location and dense clustering that has been, the center of kind of human economic innovation for the past, 2,000 years. So is that going to change? I think there are a lot of jobs that don't need to be like clustered, right? But I think particularly around creativity, around innovation, I think that interpersonal connection and that sort of velocity of interaction is hard to replicate remotely, at least for the time being. So I think you'll see more. I can't see that always going away. But I think, like to your point, the immediate effect is, I think very, very clearly there's going to be a lot of work from home and a lot of distribution of teams going forward.
But do you think this is actually temporary? I think that everybody is asking this question. So is this happening because it's temporary? Because like we are really not allowed to go out there, or maybe you're not feeling safe to go to the office environment and work from there. So it's actually that we don't have a choice. But actually, when we have the choice, do you think actually that this will remain to be the case? And I think this is like the economic dilemma that people are going through now. So can you really plan for like what will happen in 2021 and 2022 based on just like what happened over the last 2 to 3 months? Like, I think I've been thinking about this. I don't know about yourself, but like, I totally agree with you that the community-based collaboration, we see this in our programs, we see it in our, like, especially in the startup ecosystem, it's a very closed one. It's it's very dynamic one in terms of interactions and how people actually know each other as a community in each country and across the region. And maybe this also translates to other industries. And I think this value will remain to be huge, like that you really can't replace by just a Zoom call or whatever.
Yeah.
And the question is, because like, say, for example, now we're hosting all these webinars, or we are now interacting with people remotely or virtually. And the question that we're asking ourselves as a company and as a team, how much of this will remain? How much of this can be kept? And how sustainable it is actually to keep this while people actually are just going about their lives as normal.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's a great, way to think about it. All I can say is like how we're thinking about it even internally within our team, right? Within our very small team. So I think what it kind of sheds light, what it exposes a bit is that there are certain industries and certain areas and certain functions that are, don't really need to be kind of very centrally located. We just do that because that's what we've always done. But there are others, on the other hand, that could really benefit from that sort of clustering, like I was saying earlier. So what we're planning on doing is, we'll always have a central office, I think. But most likely there are some workflows that are done very individually. So if I'm working, someone on the team is working on a financial model, for example, or on a presentation that's very individually focused, right? It's about getting work done. I think what you'll see is there's a big productivity boost by someone working at home, because you don't have a lot of the time wasted in commute, and then a lot of time wasted in lack of productivity elsewhere, right? Like when you're in an office, you talk to people, you go to lunch, you think about other stuff. I think what you're seeing, and this is very anecdotal and not like based on any science, that actually people, when they're task oriented, they seem to be a lot more productive when they're working at home. But then you still need to be able to kind of collaborate in teams around conceptualizing new ideas or concepts. And that's much more of a collaborative thing that you cannot supplant with Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever it may be. So I think that particular area is, you have to kind of find the balance between the two. And I think that's what it's going to look like. So what we're trying to do is we're saying we'll do, 3 days in the office, 2-3 days in the office, and then 2 days at home. Not because we're worried about the disease or anything, but much more about, being focused around, if there's kind of task-oriented stuff for us as a team, that stuff we should do alone at home. We don't need to come to the office for that unless you want to, really. And you actually get a productivity boost. Whereas if you're in a group, like where there are kind of stuff that you need to do together, whether that's kind of thinking through a problem or conceptualizing something or thinking about something new, that tends to be something we want to organize our week around doing in the office. So split our week between home and the office. And I think that's what we're at early stages of trying this out. And I think it's an interesting model. I think there's something there. The only kind of like hard science to back it up is there's, if you see why this could work is you notice that, like, if you look at productivity measures in the economy as a whole, globally, there haven't been any big productivity gains in a long time, even as technology has increased. And I think maybe part of the answer of that is built into this, the fact that actually offices, for some part of what you do, aren't very productive. And the more we are urbanized, there are some elements that are lost in that productivity, right? We should be gaining productivity, we're not. So I think finding that balance seems to be like the key part of getting this right.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think maybe for startups, especially for the tech sector in general, it's a little bit different because like we are used to this somewhat, right? So in terms of communication, in terms of having like Zoom calls, and like I think nobody in like the startup ecosystem or the tech sector was new to Zoom, right? We find like many people coming in from other sectors who are getting used to Slack and Zoom and like remote communication and how to maintain efficient communication. But I think we have been blessed maybe because of this, and that actually the nature of how tech works, and maybe how venture capital works as well, that you are based out of Dubai, but you invest in startups all across the region, and you're even mentioning East Africa and Pakistan. Like most probably you will go there and meet them once, but like throughout the lifetime of the investment, you wouldn't be meeting them in person that frequently as you are based not in their countries or the location they are based out of. I think it's the same for us actually. If I also trying to shed some light on how we think about this as Flat6Labs. We shifted very quickly actually to like virtual programming, as we call it. And I think I was really surprised and also proud that all our team managed to do this very, very quickly. Like it's just one week we're in the office having like one event, say in Bahrain or in Cairo, and like the following week everybody was in Zoom and like having virtual programming. The startups were there, the mentors were there, and everybody shifted to virtual programming very quickly. And I think this is like testament to how people are like more confident in technology in our space, and they can adapt to these new technologies and new normal quickly. Despite all the challenges, of course, that they are facing, and especially specific sectors that were hit very badly, like tourism, for example, or travel, or transportation and mobility. Of course, these are sectors that were impacted really hugely. I remember like there was like that report that WAMDA and ArabNet released, I think last week. And I think it mentioned like 25% of travel startups in the region already shut down. And it's huge, because like actually travel startups, usually people looked at them as like kind of a cash cow kind of thing. Like it's very, people are always traveling, especially with the region, and like just to find that 1/4 of travel startups in the region disappeared within 2 to 3 months. It's very, very difficult. How do you think about this? Like, you mentioned sectors that you will be focused on, like fintech and edtech and health tech, and all these 3 sectors are definitely thriving now because of like the lack of physical interactions, and there are more like safe options to use as products. Do you have any ideas about like specific? Did you shift your strategy in terms of the sectors that you're looking at? If someone comes to you with like a travel concept, would you actually even listen to them this year or next year, or tell them like just go and find like another business to do or something? How are you thinking about this?
So let me give you, let me kind of shift the way we think about it is a bit different, but which may lead to us looking at like a travel company. And let me explain why. I think there is this massive economic dislocation happening now, which is like way bigger than the Corona story, right? Like, and that's the kind of big question. Bigger, deeper, faster than like the 2008, 2010 crisis, right? Financial crisis. So if you look back and try to kind of distill the learnings from that, I think what you found was when you had like this massive labor market dislocation, what did that lead to? It led to, the rise of companies in like quote unquote the sharing economy, like Uber, Airbnb, etc. Companies that are suffering now. I mean, but those business models emerged then, and the reason for that is because as people exited the labor market very harshly en masse, you had this, interest in platforms that allowed individuals to monetize like personal assets, whether that's their car or their home, etc. I mean, that was the original idea. Or supplement their income in like a difficult situation. I mean, that's on the supply side of those marketplaces. That's what kind of drove lots of interest. On the demand side, similarly, people wanted relatively effective, not as expensive modes of either transportation or travel, right? So as we kind of fast forward to today, I think what we're interested in is saying, with this dislocation happening in the regions we're operating in, what does that mean in terms of gaps in the market to help address some of these kind of systemic issues, right? That's what we're interested in and trying to kind of answer those questions. So one early thing that it made us think about is we don't have in the region a culture of freelance work, and we don't have so much, less of a culture, but less of a organized, structured way to kind of create a marketplace for freelancers across the across the spectrum, different disciplines, different areas, different verticals, different kind of values, right? High end, mid, low end, etc. So that's very interesting. We're in an environment where corporates are shedding jobs and will probably like hire back slowly, particularly in the GCC, for example, and aided by the fact that all this remote work modes of operation have been validated. Is there going to be a big shift towards finding ways to enable companies and employers to recruit people on a freelance or job basis in kind of the same way you have like platforms elsewhere in the world, like Upwork, for example, or seasonal workers for like, and that's kind of for knowledge workers, but for seasonal workers for like, restaurants, whatever, right? Different areas. So I think that's a huge kind of area to to kind of like unpack, to think about, to figure out how we kind of get into. So I think that's a really, as an example of the way we think. So if that leads to something around travel, we would look at it, right? So it's always looking at it within that lens, like extrapolate what you think this moment, this economic moment is going to lead to, and figure out a solution, right? Like that's almost like the way we want to think about it. The other big thing is retail, right? Like, it's the nature of retail in our markets are disproportionately agency-based. I mean, with the exception of Turkey, meaning people import brands, right? There's very little relative to the size of our economies compared to other markets in the world where there's kind of homegrown private, like their own homegrown brands, whether that's everything from FMCG through to fashion, across the board. There's like disproportionately we import our brands relative to other emerging markets. Certain areas more than others. I think what technology lets you do today is enable you to build your own kind of quote unquote private label brands direct to consumer. In very efficient supply chains while existing retail is being disrupted and going through pain. And I think there's a moment for entrepreneurs now, used to call them like kind of e-commerce entrepreneurs, but I think it's a bit different now. It's like direct to consumer, brand building opportunities to build across the spectrum, like offerings for consumers that are more price sensitive in a recessionary environment. And that is, the product in its DNA is built for the local consumer. And it leverages a digital first platform. So like online first, that's how you sell, but also has a bit of omni-channel, a bit of offline retail that complements the experience. So I think that's a big kind of like movement that, if I was to put big bets on what's coming, I think that I would do that. That's one of the areas.
Yeah. And to be honest, I think it's very interesting, I think, for our region, because I do believe that our region is very super resilient in many ways. Yeah, for the last 10 years, with like the huge number of uprisings and wars and conflicts that we have been seeing, and like all the oil prices and what's going up and what's going down and all of this, we have survived. And like, I remember in 2011 and 2012 in Egypt, when people like used to ask us, like, do you have startups applying to join you? And I remember that actually cycle over cycle, we had almost double the number of applications from cycle 1 to cycle 2 to cycle 3, and from one year to another. And I remember we had like a lockdown just like 1 or 2 blocks away from the office, and the startups were showing up, and their businesses definitely were impacted somewhat. But at the end of the day, they survived, and many of them, they're still actually operating and growing and thriving. So I think we are like maybe masters when it comes to like temporary situations and always being hopeful about the future, right? Especially in this region, I guess, that things will get better. We have been through a lot. And I think we always like tell people that maybe what we saw before with like the uprisings in the region and like the lockdowns and all of this and the curfews that we have, that was just like the setup for what we're going through now on a very prolonged period. So we know it, we have been through it, and we survived. And this is what we tell the startups.
Yeah.
We are still accepting their applications, we're investing in them. We're not trying to like prioritize sectors over other sectors, but definitely there are more sectors that maybe are about today than maybe next year. So
yeah.
in terms of like what people are looking at like as tech solutions in the education space, and how we are now seeing governments that have never looked before at remote education, and now they are forced actually to be doing like remote exams and remote education. And all of this happened within 2 months, where they had to shift their classes to be online. Although they have been like, when it comes to online education, many of them, they were very like, you know, opposing to the idea. And it makes sense, of course, because like universities and schools and governments, they want, you know, they want the students to be in the classroom. And I think this takes me to the Q&A questions that you have been receiving, because we can shift to this now. There's one question about Saudi Arabia, the first one. And as you have this Saudi angle as well in your fund, with your main LP being a Saudi-based conglomerate. So maybe you can take this one. So it says like, what are you expecting will happen in Saudi? Do you think like the growth engine in general for businesses in the region and Saudi will decline? Or it will continue to be the same?
Yeah, I think, good question there, by the way. So I think clearly like Saudi is the region's largest economy and has been that for a long time, and has, you know, what happens, you know, you sneeze in Riyadh, you catch cold in Cairo, right? So, and that's been the case for the past, you know, 30, 40 years. I think the country is going through a really interesting transformation, one that has been needed for a very long time. I think it's interesting to see that the crisis has actually like advanced this much faster than originally anticipated. There's a much faster kind of like transformation they need, particularly around diversification of their economy. I think, and it's not a Saudi thing. This is a region. This is a MENA region issue, which is our economies across the region are, you know, statist, driven by governments, where, you know, disproportionately the governments are the employer and the driver of the economies. And I think whether these are oil-rich countries or not, the mode of operation is the same. Just the amount of zeros on your balance sheet is different, right? It's just bigger or smaller, but the idea is the same. It's the same concept. We're in Jordan or in Egypt or in Lebanon or in the GCC, the same idea. It's just how big is the transfer payment from the government to the citizens. And clearly that is under enormous strain now. Has been for a long time. It's just accelerated. So I think it's really interesting to see how the region more broadly, you know, Saudi in particular, leading, you know, that transformation. How do we transition to a productive economy that is not dependent purely on the state as its economic engine, because we can't afford it anywhere anymore. And I think that is happening at breakneck speed right now. And it does involve, no doubt, like a bit of pain. But I think it is absolutely, no question, like required across the region. And it's something that has been happening, you know, a bit more slowly, but I think is going to go very quickly now. So I think the long-term prospect is that of optimism, that we, you know, that it's something that's great for, you know, our economies, and particularly for our sectors, you know, within the kind of tech and digital sphere. This is the areas that are most likely going to boom in that kind of transformation. That does mean that there is pain in the middle, right? We know the tech sector is not totally divorced from the underlying economy. So there will be difficulties in this readjustment, but I think it's critically needed to be able to move forward. So that's kind of my long-winded answer, if it's helpful.
No, I think it's very helpful, and I do agree with you. Saudi is very important, and I think with all the efforts, and everybody was expecting so much out of Saudi this year when it comes to venture capital and startups, because of all the capital that was injected last year by the funds of funds. And the new venture capital fund managers that were created out of this. And I think definitely 2020 is still like Saudi's year when it comes to leaping ahead in venture capital, and actually the number of startups, I think the last Magnet report, definitely Saudi, I think like jumped like 1 or 2 ranks when it came to like the number of deals. And it makes sense because it's a big market. There's so much need there for creative solutions for different aspects of life and businesses. And of course, with the new capital being injected into the market, it's very doable. And I think it's still doable. I think actually all of the VCs that we talk to in Saudi and the funds of funds and the government, they are still 100% committed. Nothing changed there in terms of strategy, in terms of like amounts being invested. It's just about the entrepreneurs to come up with their ideas. It's their time to thrive, their time to try to come up with the solutions in the sectors that they believe are most needed now. And I think there's a lot of backing from the government and different corporates and sectors in Saudi to make this happen. The following question is about Egypt. So maybe I can take this one about the dynamic for the Egyptian startup ecosystem at 2020. What types of startups are we expecting to do well, and which ones are we encouraging to pivot hard? I think like this maybe takes me one step back about one thing that I believe all startups should be doing now. I don't think that they should be treating this as business as usual. I think we have seen this in our portfolio where some startups moved too fast or very fast, and some of them they were reluctant. They said like they said, okay, this is just like another crisis that we're going through, and that's it. I think you just like all of them, they need to sit down, go to like the drawing board and the brainstorming board, and actually start thinking about like, okay, what's different? How can I actually, if there's an opportunity for us to pivot or change our business model or to like create partnerships in a specific sector, I think this is the time for you to do this. And don't treat this as just business as usual. This is not usual, what we're going through now. And although maybe you have been through similar situations before over the last decade or so, I think this is huge because it's not just impacting one country where you can look for capital outside of Egypt when there are no VCs in Egypt, or maybe you can, no, like it's impacting the entire region and the entire world as well. So I think you just need to be resilient for sure, confident about your ability to pass this crisis safely, and as well, you need a plan, and you need to involve your stakeholders as investors, as your team, and even your customers as well, to understand what they're looking for and what they need and what is lacking in the market as well. In terms of sectors, I think it's very obvious like what is thriving now and what's not thriving. So of course we have seen a huge jump when it comes to our portfolio in the health tech space, where like really like the demand is way bigger than the supply overnight. It happened literally overnight. Food tech and food delivery in general, it's taking huge steps forward that maybe would have never happened otherwise. And of course, in other sectors, especially when it comes to transportation and mobility, moving people especially, it's not that easy. And this is one of the biggest sectors that Egypt actually was also advancing within when it came to transportation, with all like the big investments that we had in Egypt over the last few years. And of course, it's a shame now to see this not moving ahead with the same speed as they were expecting. But I think all of them are very smart enough to know when to pivot and what to change. Like we heard the news yesterday from Karim that now they are focused more on their super app, for example, in comparison to their transportation products. Yep. So I think this is very important. I think every startup should do the same and not give up. Like, and even for travel startups, I think you give a very clear demonstration about what would work in the travel sector now when it comes to startups and technology. And I think they should do that for sure, and not just like give up and move on. The phone question is about Dubai. I think it's more of like a statement, if like why Dubai is going back too soon. This is like a very interesting thing because I've always been thinking about this, especially in the UAE, because like most of the businesses or the startups that are based out of Dubai or Abu Dhabi, as you might be familiar, they are renting space from free zones. So, and actually the free zones are all government-based free zones. And the government makes like money on this from the licenses and the leasing of these offices. And now there's that conflict of like, okay, these startups need to keep growing, they need to pay their dues, but also it's very difficult for them to be in the office or actually fulfill their dues when it comes to the free zones and all of this. Do you have any idea about this or anything that you want to
I think
share?
it's a bigger, not to go down too much this particular rabbit hole, but like in Dubai, I mean the growth model, the growth model in Dubai historically has always been real estate driven, whether that's for commercial, for companies or startups, or or around like retail, etc. So I mean, I think it just needs, what it's led to is like, I think there needs to be a reimagining of the growth model, right? Like it can't just be about, we'll build stuff and people are going to come, because clearly there's a shake in that confidence. But that's been happening, the slowdown related to that's been happening for years, right? It's not, this has just made it much faster, happen all at once and much faster, but it's been going on a long time. Retail in the GCC has been slower, like for the past, has been declining for years, and driven by e-commerce, right? That's one of the main drivers of it. There's been a slowing down in real estate, particularly in Dubai, I think, for a while now. And this is just going to make it faster. So I think there's a need for the reimagining of the growth model here.
And I think especially in the UAE, the government, especially in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, they're very smart, and they definitely usually react very quickly when it comes to these matters, right? And I expect that, although this might be a challenge today, I think definitely the solution will emerge very soon. And I've been seeing this in terms of supporting SMEs and startups actually from the government.
Yeah. I think one great thing about Dubai is like it's just the ability to reinvent itself constantly over and over again. I think it's everyone wrote off Dubai in 2008, 2009 then, and it's just come back bigger and better than it did then from that crisis. And I can only imagine the same is going to happen right now. So I think it's very well positioned in the very long run to benefit from like the big transformation of the region towards more of a knowledge economy. So hopefully, I mean, we're all betting that it works well here and the region as a whole, because we're so interconnected here that it's not like isolated islands, right? We need to all grow together. But inshallah, I'm hoping it's gonna go well. So
I have an interesting question here. Are fund managers, will fund managers disappear anytime in the near future? And what would replace them? And this is a question for you. I'm not sure, like, would like AI replace you, Khaled? Do you think like you can just like not do your job anymore, and maybe like an LP would hire an AI engine to make investment decisions and support the portfolio, for example?
I think there was a fund that did that in the US called Correlation Ventures. The theory was they had like built this really intricate algorithm, and then you go in to the pitch meeting and then they feed it in the algorithm, and the next day they tell you if they're investing or not within one day. That was it didn't work out very well. Anyway, no, I think in reference to what I was saying earlier, I guess like it's not very helpful in my investor pitches when I pitch to LPs saying like in the very long run, you don't need a fund manager. But I'm trying a bit self-defeating, but I think what I'm trying to say is, and this is not the near term, this is like, the shift, the wider shift, which, to give an analogy, I think there is going to be a shift in private capital markets, private investment, as opposed to public markets, similar to how there was this kind of big growth in ETFs, right, in public markets, electronically traded, exchange rate funds, electronically funds, where you can build specific areas and just automatically invest in those areas against kind of specific rules in a more transparent system. And I think the rise of platforms like AngelList, and that's just the first iteration of it. You can just extrapolate that, but the first iteration of that is, you can go onto AngelList, you can see like there are these micro fund managers, micro investors, they invest in, they invest in company X, and you can join them in their syndicate. And that's incredibly disruptive, just as a first step. If you take that to its logical conclusion, I think you can see how a lot of investors are going to want to move to models that look around that. And that's just one step, right? One piece of it. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I do know that model in the long run is under pressure. I mean, it's this whole business model is like 50 years old, right? Like started in the 60s, 60s, 70s. So
especially in the region, it's quite nascent here as well. So.
Yeah. It's not to say that it won't shift in of itself, right? especially as it comes under pressure because of like fees, because of like people distrusting the blind pool investing, right? Like people are distrustful of that. You've had, especially in emerging markets, you know, the demise of like Abraj is a serious thing, right? Like that, you know, that really has ramifications in the long run, meaning, you know, the traditional pools of capital.
That feels like 1 century ago, like now that everything happened.
But on that way,
like,
people are
it just
very
happened last year.
funds. Yeah, it just happened last year. Like,
it's
I
crazy.
think the lasting impact is people don't like, you know, blind pool investing, but they don't want to do the work to do due diligence and like, you know, do the deal. So if you find a way to bridge it, then that's the future. So I think the future is some combination of AngelList and of intelligent networks. We're able to tap capital to do deals quickly, nearly instantaneously. And I think you're having emerging models that kind of do bits and pieces of this. I think that's a long term, but it's not any time. It's not like tomorrow, right? It's not like,
I don't think it's in our lifetime, to be honest. Like maybe, I guess, or maybe at least in this cycle of like, because like at least in the region as well, right? So like for the first time now we're seeing corporates and big organizations that traditionally wouldn't invest in venture capital or technology coming into this space, right? Which was happening maybe in like other more developed markets 20 and 30 and 40 years ago. So I think we haven't even seen the full cycle in the region yet. So maybe like just allow us a little bit more time here. There's like one nice message here from our chairman of Flat6Labs, Hani Sumbati, just wishing you his best and telling you that he's looking forward to doing so many investments together with you. So please make sure to invite Sawari Ventures to look at your deals as well.
Or Sawari to invite me,
please, Hani, make sure to invite Khalid when you have good deals. Alfie as well is throwing in his hat here. And he's asking, okay. Doesn't this undervalue the VC who picks companies that they like, but more importantly, that they can impact companies that fit with the VC experiences?
Yeah, I think you can, it's not about so much as like the disappearance of it's not, so let me clarify what I was trying to say. So I guess it's like, if I'm prophesizing this crystal ball of what the model is going to look like, it's not on the interaction between the VC and the entrepreneur. I think there's a lot of growth in that area around driving value and the experience of the VC and giving operating support. I really believe in that. I think the disruption is on the other side of the VC business, the relationship between capital, LPs, and the fund and the managers. I think that's where it's changing or will change, not between the VC and the entrepreneurs or the companies. I think they're actually, it's going to go more into like, we want to work with specific founders. We want to work with like specific VCs around, you know, adding a lot of value, supporting in a meaningful way. Because we all say, I mean, I'm chief amongst them. I say we add value, but in reality, we find it very difficult to do it in a proper way. It's hard to kind of make it work. So I think funds and VCs that put this at the center of their mission will succeed, and to do it in an operating way. I think that's kind of like a key parameter. I think the disruption is on the other side. So investors just wanting to lock up their money in funds. So can the fund manager or the VC, let me not call it fund manager, the VC channel capital from sources of capital from what would have been LPs directly to companies without being locked up? And not on like this kind of old school deal by deal basis, but in some kind of like pledged way, and in a different kind of like format. But you still need that individual that kind of drives that network of capital towards the fund, towards the companies that receive that capital. So I think that's the change in the model. So you become almost like a bit like, for lack of a better word, a bit like merchant banks, you know, old school merchant, but on a tech platform, right? Something like that. I don't know what it looks like. I just know disruption in that mode is coming just because of the nature our capital is flowing. And if we look to the public markets for inspiration, I think you see elements of that there, because public markets are starting to look more and more like private markets, just in terms of like how long companies are being held private, etc. Having said that, though, ETFs are taking a huge beating in this because they thought that they would like they're misreading the market in big way because of how the rules are built. But that's aside. I mean, that's a side note.
I'll actually go something that Hen usually says that maybe VC is new here in the region, but like he's hoping for the day where VCs become like commercial banks. And I think the accelerators, to be honest, is like the closest thing that we can get for this. Like it's like where you go through a process, you apply, somebody examines your application and says, okay, you are fit enough to receive the funding and will support you with X, Y, and Z. So maybe more of like an industrial outlook for how you can manage the process of like fund management and investments.
And related to that and innovations in the model, like this kind of like, I don't want to call it venture studio because like it has a bad connotation, but you see in it in the region. Let's take the region, like models like like Flat6Labs, but also if you look at like Beko's recently launched thing and Wanda X in prior work before,
it's like different types of venture capital investments at the end of the day, like,
in a way. And I think what they all are hitting on is this kind of core thing, which is there are, especially now, great groups of like highly talented people, unlike like 5-10 years ago, right? Like you have people who've been through a cycle either in major companies and Souk or Kareem, etc., but also in mid-career professionals at corporates who are coming through a cycle. They're kind of like great at what they do, and they know they want to do something, right? But they might need that little soft landing to get there. So I think really focusing on enabling those people through investment, through support, and through kind of creating a track to give them, for lack of a better word I always use, like a soft landing into the world of entrepreneurship and building a business. I think that's incredibly valuable. And there's so much innovation, I think, that can be built around the model for that. And that's another way the model is shifting, right? You it doesn't have to be like, somebody has a great idea, they bootstrap, it's like, they own 100% of the company and then they give up 10 to 15 at the first round. It could be like flipped on its head totally. You could do, much more kind of founder friendly, like venture builder type of thing. I mean, Rocket, I hope there's nobody from Rocket on this, but Rocket gave this a bad name, right? Because of just how aggressive they are.
They might be watching, and this will be on YouTube, so
Yeah. So, but like,
you can always go back to this if you want.
But
I think we're running out of time, unfortunately. So I don't know if I have any like departing words you would like to share as well before we sign off.
Yeah, thank you. Just thank you for the conversation. It's always fun to do this. Like, thanks to you, Ramiz. And
unfortunately, I have so many more questions that we didn't get the chance to answer. But hopefully, maybe we can. Like, you have access to the list, so we'll share the questions with you if you would like to email the people who ask them, or maybe have separate conversations with any of them as well.
Fantastic, great. Like, thanks again. This was awesome. We should do this again, like very often. Hopefully in person, Ramiz.
Hopefully in person, and hopefully very soon. And Abbas, I would like to highlight the next webinar that we're hosting next week at the same time. My colleague, Dina Shinoufi, the Chief Investment Officer of Flat6Labs, will be moderating a session with Farid Belhaj, the Vice President for the Middle East and North Africa of the World Bank. So please tune in next week to attend the session. And I think we'll be sending out the invitations very soon as well, so you can sign up. Thank you so much, Khaled, and thank you again, Nuwa Capital, for like helping us put together this session. It was very nice actually talking to you, Khaled, and catching up as well. And a lot of insights. I hope that this was useful for people. I'm sorry that we didn't manage to answer all your questions, but hopefully over the next sessions, and maybe actually we can do another one of these if Khaled is available, like as a round two.
Anytime.
Sometime soon as well.
Anytime. Thanks, Ram.
Thank you so much, Khaled, and take care. Goodbye.